Hello to Brandon, Carolyn, Chris, Mary, and all the members of the study group. Thank you for your questions, but most of all, thank you for reading my book. It's a great honor. Let's go ahead and hit these questions. You asked me why I picked the name Augustine. I guess I flatter myself in thinking that I maybe have something in common with him. I like the idea of a saint who's just a little bit full of himself. I like the idea of a saint with a past. Also, I worked at a restaurant called Agostino's right before I became a monk. And in grad school, I studied with one of the world's leading authorities on Augustine's Confessions. So it all seemed to sort of fall into place for me. He's not the most politically correct saint, but one of my life mottos is Da mihi castitatem et continentiam sed noli modo, which is Augustine's famous quote, Lord, give me chastity and continence, but not yet. You asked me why I dedicated the book to my godmother. Originally, I had planned to dedicate it to all the little people who got me where I am today, but the publisher decided that the readership probably wouldn't get the joke. So, and besides that, I prefer to dedicate it to my godmother because she's one of the holiest, most prayerful, smartest people I know. It's as simple as that. Laughing with someone that laughs at you. You said it seems hard to you. Brandon, it's awfully hard for me too. And that's not always a good idea, I suppose. You don't want to encourage somebody to do something evil. But on the other hand, most of the time, I think a really effective weapon against an insult is just to give into it. I call it the Paris of Troy argument. In the Iliad, Hector comes back from battle and says to his younger brother, you're useless and worthless, and we all hate you, and you should just die, and this whole war is because of you. And Paris just says, yeah, you're right, and takes the wind out of his sails. In fact, I was coaching rugby one afternoon, and one of the boys was smarting off to me, and he said, this drill is stupid, and I stupidly responded, your mom's stupid. And he said, I love my mom. And it was, I can't think of a better retort or a more effective way of countering an insult. If he sees any connections with this book and the spiritual teachings of Eckhart of Tolle, no idea who he is. So I don't see any connections with the spiritual teachings of Eckhart, but I'm certainly going to look him up and read him because he must be a pretty wise guy. And just let him know that, yes, I am a worm, and thank you. Yeah, I just recently heard a wonderful quote from Winston Churchill. He said, I know that we are all worms, but I like to think that I am a glow worm. Isn't that nice? But we're all worms nonetheless. Let's see. Carolyn teaches art, says, what ages are the teenage boys you are teaching? I teach 7th grade, 8th grade, 11th grade, and seniors. And it was originally the intended audience, but the audience kind of shifted in my head as I rewrote the book. I had a lot of help from a woman named Joanna Weaver, whose books I also recommend. She wrote a fantastic book called Having a Merry Heart in a Martha World. And she's the one who kind of gave the book its final form. I sent her the manuscript. We met at a conference, and I sent her the manuscript, and she sent it back and said, because originally it was just a commentary on the rule for teenagers, and she said, this is brilliant, but no one's going to read it because anyone who'd read the rule would not be a teenager, and any teenager would not read a commentary on the rule. So you've just eliminated your entire audience. And it was she who said I needed to illustrate it, which I then did, that no chapter should be longer than a page and a half, and that I needed a better hook. I should go on Amazon and see what books were selling to teenagers, self-help. And it was all about self-esteem, which fit in perfectly with humility and the rule. And so Originally, yes, it was a book for teenagers. Now it's a book, I hope, for everyone. How large were these classes? Well, the prep school that we run is pretty small, so most of my classes are about 18, 19 kids. The class where we actually read this book and use it is 17 seventh graders, if that gives you some sort of idea. How did you keep the content of the book from going over their heads? I didn't worry about going over their heads. I think very little goes over a teenager's head. Very little goes over a 12-year-old's head even. I was walking down the hall the other day with a book called British Literature for Dummies. And one of my students, a 7th grader, walked up and he said, "Why are you reading that?" And I said, "So I can figure out how to teach you." And he said, "I'm not British." He told, again, these kids, I think kids tend to be a lot smarter than we give them credit for. So, no, I didn't have any qualms about going over their heads. In fact, I find that the more sophisticated the dialogue, the rhetoric, the more of a challenge they feel it is, and the more excited they are to try to live up to it. And you got to present it right. Let's see. "I've read the book 3 times," she said, "and reviewed the books in our study group and felt that the book might have been easier for an older young adult." Yeah, I agree. There are some topics like struggling with chastity that would be harder for a young teenager to understand. But like I said, I'm always surprised at how mature and sophisticated these kids are or can be. Yeah. "The Catholic Church needs more recruits into the priesthood. Were there intentions here to influence and inspire these teens in that direction?" Well, yeah, that's always my intention. Among other things, I'm the vocation director at St. Louis Abbey. So, yes, my intention is always to recruit monks. So, in fact, if there's anyone in your group who is single, under the age of 30, 40, I guess, and so inclined, tell them to give me a call. But I think there is a crisis of priests, but it's not my crisis. It's not the crisis of my monastery. We've got plenty of priests, plenty of vocations. It's really a lay crisis, right? It's you who don't have enough priests, not me. I'm going to have a priest till the day I die. I also have this wonderful friend named Edu, who is actually he was, now he is a priest of the diocese. He was in seminary with me. And he used to say, 50 years ago, all of your priests were named Flanagan and Hannigan and O'Shaughnessy, and there was no vocation crisis. Now your priests are coming from Africa, and they're named Umbasa and Edu, and now we have a vocation crisis, right? I think there's always been a crisis of vocations in the church, but it really depends on where you look. The Nashville Dominicans aren't having a crisis. The East Coast Dominicans aren't having a crisis. My monastery is not having a crisis of vocations. So as long as you hold to the teachings of the church and are faithful to the sacraments and prayer, you'll have enough priests. I'd be interested in knowing how the book was received by teenage boys. Yeah, I'm surprised at how well it was received. I think generally kids are tired of being told that they're precious snowflakes and that they should follow their dreams and that they're perfect just the way they are. And there's something kind of refreshing and honest about being told that you're imperfect and you need to work on that. I think by and large, kids respect honesty, which may explain why rock and roll singers are so compelling, because they tend to not fake stuff. But by and large, no, in fact, overwhelmingly, it's been received really well by teenage boys, which is a surprise to me. Over what time period would these teenage boys have read and discussed this book? Oh, I see where you're going here. You're trying to set out a lesson plan. I do 1 chapter a day with the kids, and that's as an introduction to the class in general. So we spend about a minute and a half, about 3 or 4 minutes reading the chapter, talking about the homework, and then we get on with the business of the day. Are you planning on writing any more books, nonfiction or fiction? Well, I started to write a zombie apocalypse set in a Trappist monastery. Sorry, that's somebody doing dishes in the background. Let's see, but that I think we've had enough zombie apocalypses, so that's kind of on hold. I was thinking of doing a collection of short stories from monks in our congregation, and I'm currently working on a book on how to make a decision. It's really, in fact, it's kind of become an obsession of mine, or yet another obsession of mine, is trying to figure out how to decide when the decision is difficult. And this isn't just vocational discernment or discernment of spirits, but just how to decide like what you're going to eat. And the interesting thing is, not spoiler alert, that all the psychiatrists and the philosophers and the theologians I've been reading tend to zero in on the same conclusion, which is that it almost kind of doesn't matter what you decide, because A, somebody's going to mess it up, probably you, in the long run. And B, if it's an easy decision, then it's because you have two good or two bad options. So if you're choosing between two good options, you're in a good spot either way. But the one thing that really distinguishes the good, the holy, the well-adjusted person from the bad person, unhappy person, is commitment. Right? You go out to eat and you say, should I have the hamburger or the chicken nuggets? And you order the chicken nuggets and spend the rest of the meal thinking about the hamburger. And, I should have had the hamburger. It's just a recipe for discontent, for unhappiness. So commitment is what distinguishes, I think, a good decision from a bad decision. But the part I haven't quite figured out yet is when it's time to quit. Like sometimes you really just authentically make the wrong decision and you have to stop. And I haven't quite figured out when that point is or how to know it when you get to it. So if you do, send me an email. Am I teaching in the UK now? Not at this moment. I went to Oxford for the Portsmouth Institute, which is a kind of Catholic program for smart prep school kids to teach them how to be sort of Catholics with class or something like that. We study the Inklings, Lewis, Tolkien, Newman, people like that. But now I'm back in the States and ready to get my brain upgraded, which should happen next week. So I'm delighted to have your prayers. And I think that's all the questions. If there are any more, I'll add an extra addendum to this video. Ooh, good. Okay, I got all that in under 15 minutes, which was my goal. Pray for me, I'll pray for you, and God bless.